Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we're going to take a look at the ingress of Saturn into Aries and its transit through the sign over the coming couple of years. So we'll look at this from a perspective of different themes that are likely to come up with this transit, how we can best utilize it, some things to watch out for, the impact that it's likely to have on the world. But before we do, I want to point out some major moments in time when it comes to this upcoming transit. So we did have a short stint last year where Saturn went into Aries during the summer. It went into Aries from Pisces on the 25th of May of last year, and it stayed there until the 21st of September. So we've gotten a little bit of a preview last summer, and then we're about to get the full transit of Saturn through Aries from the 13th of February 2026 through the 13th of April of 2028. So we're going to be working with this energy for a couple of years, and we're going to get some specific, very important alignments during this period of time. There will be more aspects than this, but in my view, these are the most important that we're getting. A few of them are going to be this year in particular. So, of course, we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that's going to take place on the 20th of February of this year. And we're already seeing a lot of those themes play out. Those two got very close together last summer, within about a quarter of a degree of each other early in Aries, like they will when they go exact on the 20th of February. And in our own personal lives, this is taking apart self-limiting beliefs. It's showing us where we have carried some illusions and hopefully enabling us to broaden our perspective beyond what we have previously believed and beyond the structures that we've previously created for ourselves, and then build anew. We're going to be getting into that in depth next week, so stay tuned for that. I won't go too far into it here, so I want to focus very much on Saturn and what it's going to be doing. We will also this spring get a conjunction from Mars to the Saturn on the 20th of April. I think I mentioned this in the year ahead. I don't love that alignment. It does look pretty conflictual. It looks very complicated. It looks very controlling, and like it's going to carry quite a bit of tension, possibly around speech issue or our thought processes. There may be a lot of anger and things like that are coming up within people. We'll look at that a bit more closely again when we get closer to it, but that will be coming up. And part of why that is so poignant of an alignment is that Mars rules Aries, and so it's in its own sign when it's there, and Saturn is in its fall when it's in Aries. And this is something that we're going to be looking at from a few different angles here, but Saturn exalts in the sign of Libra. Not only does it have a lot of the tools that it typically uses in that sign, patience, long-term planning, a broad kind of worldly perspective that it functions within, but it also has an added human element to it. It's even more sensitive to the needs of human beings when it's in Libra. So it's in a really wonderful place when it's there. The opposite sign to that is Aries, and this is where Saturn has its fall. There's a lot of different reasons for that. But part of the issue here, and part of the issue that's going to be getting exacerbated around that 20th of April conjunction with Mars, is that Aries works on short timelines. It deals in immediacy. It is very focused on the individual and initiating, getting things started, that first burst of energy that we work with. So Saturn doesn't function its best here. It doesn't have its usual tools. It's not able as easily or as naturally to do its long-term planning, to keep things in balance, to keep things structured and in order. Aries isn't really concerned about that. Mars isn't really concerned about that. So that Saturn is going to be really incredibly weak, especially around that 20th of April time frame. And that's after it's already been dissolved a lot of its structures by Neptune very early in the year. And that's after it's already had so many of its structures dissolved in its conjunction to Neptune. So after we've given up all of our narratives about how things used to be, or our assumptions about how things are, our assumptions about our place in the world and what to expect and so forth, then we get a conjunction to Mars where Mars is really stepping in and amplifying, again, the immediacy, assertion, individuality, things like this. So that's going to be interesting to see. But again, we'll get into that more when we get closer to it. What's great about Saturn's time in Aries is that it will be getting a few assists from Jupiter as Jupiter moves into Leo and trines Saturn a few times from that place. So we'll be getting exact trines between Jupiter and Saturn in the sky on September 1st of 2026. We'll get another on the 3rd of April of 2027. And then we'll get our final trine between those two on the 12th of July of 2027. And what this is going to help with is bringing things a bit more back into balance. It's going to help for us to push forward and create a sense of momentum that is sustainable and that makes some sense. We're still going to be working on shorter time frames, on more personal considerations, personal issues. How do I fit into the picture? What is my role in all of this? We'll be dealing with a lot of those questions, certainly. But Jupiter's going to help offer some hope and optimism and much more of a can-do attitude to that Saturn as it's moving through a sign where it can get very easily frustrated. So that covers a lot of our dates here. I will just say, if you wind up enjoying this video as we go through all of this and you don't mind giving it a thumbs up or hype, I would really greatly appreciate that. But let's go ahead and talk about Saturn and Aries. Again, we'll go through this thematically and then we'll take it through sign by sign. So check out the timestamps if that is what you are looking for. What I want to start with when it comes to Saturn and Aries is that when we're talking about an ingress of a planet into the next sign, so Saturn is moving out of Pisces into Aries, there's always a corrective function of each sign addressing some of the shortfallings of the signs before. So when it comes to Pisces, Pisces is very universal. It can be very wishy-washy. It can have a lot of difficulty with boundaries, and it's also very, very, very passive. Now, that has helped us in a little bit of a way of having a less rigid Saturn that we're working with. But on the other hand, when it comes to really being able to gain some traction and push ourselves forward and to build something, to create something, to initiate, that's been lacking, and that will not be lacking with Saturn and Aries. So that is something off the bat that we get to look forward to, is that this is a much more active phase that we're moving into. And that's going to be beyond Saturn. Neptune is also going to be moving into Aries, very similar thing. We'll also see Uranus moving from the passive sign of Taurus into the much more active sign of Gemini. So that's really going to be the name of the game going forward. And with Saturn taking part in the movement of the energies out of the passive into the active, Saturn allows us to structure that, to build upon that. So that is really helpful. But here I want to show some of the complications of having Saturn in a sign that it's not particularly comfortable in one of these very personal signs. So notice how Saturn is in its fall in Aries, and it's in detriment when it's in Cancer and Leo. These are fundamentally individual signs, focused on the self, focused on the identity, focused on the personal. And Saturn, again, it's the farthest out visible planet. It has to do with worldly considerations, with institutions, with the way that things are, with tradition, with that which goes far beyond us. And so it represents responsibility, structure, accountability, social consequence. And it manages all of this by being very deliberative. But Aries doesn't really carry that energy, so it's not providing those tools. So we will run into issues repeatedly throughout the coming couple of years between our impulses versus our responsibility, wanting instant gratification versus patience. We're also going to be seeing a lot of push and pull between a creative, destructive aspect to the Saturn. So breaking down what isn't working anymore, breaking down what can't quite justify itself, and then building a new structure out of that. Saturn is sometimes going to get the upper hand there, and it will build some responsible structures, but we're also going to be dealing with a lot of impulses to creative destruction in society and in ourselves even throughout this period of time as well. So that is going to be a back and forth. And we're likely to feel that we're in this stop and go time table where we're pushing forward and then we're halted and we get stuck in a holding pattern and then we push forward. So the timing is going to be weird. Aries wants immediacy. It wants action. It wants to do things on its own. It wants to be adventurous. It wants to try new things. It wants to be the first to do things. And yet Saturn respects the tried and true. What do we know works? That's what it would much rather stick with. And it demands a lot of accountability and patience. It definitely demands discipline and effort, good, clean effort, what I always recommend when we're dealing with Saturn. And it brings consequence to our actions. So Aries is really good at being able to take action and avoid some of the consequences. As long as Saturn is here, that consequence is always going to be right around the corner. So we're not going to be able to get away with things for very long if we're not being responsible. So there's this fundamental paradox of Saturn in Aries. And it's not always going to be the most comfortable fusion, but it is very initiatory. So this isn't about suppressing Aries and suppressing the instincts and the initiative, but rather trying to structure it, trying to be patient with it, trying to discipline our action and stay on course. So as we're pursuing growth, which is something we will be naturally desiring through this time, doing so in a patient way with some restraint, with some delayed gratification, rather than forcibly. When we run into obstacles, it's not a full-on red light. It's not saying don't do this, but it is saying hold up, patience, think this through before you go to your next step. You may actually want to do this in a very different kind of a way. Let's give it some time. This is also going to be a period of time where we will see a huge amount of courage. To have integrity underpinning that is going to be very important because of the fact that action is going to have consequences in this time. So we will see, obviously we can see the world is rowdy right now. It's going to continue to be rowdy throughout 2026, but it's going to be important for people who are doing community organizing and things like this to understand that there is a need to pay attention a few moves ahead, to not forget about potential blowback, to not forget about the consequences of the action that is being taken. So trying just to have all of our action as much as possible be fueled by a sense of deep-seated integrity, and then bringing courage to bear on that and due to that. Another thing that's going to be very significant in this contradiction here is issues of leadership. Leaders are going to get forged in this time. It's going to be, you're going to get put through the kiln if you are in a leadership position. And this is, of course, why integrity is so important, because there's going to be some very, very poor leaders. This is authority in its fall, quite literally, when we're talking about Saturn and Aries. And again, the reason for that is that there will be power grabs and selfishness and self-servingness, this shallow ambition that is fueling some people in positions of authority. They'll be impulsive. They will use very poor judgment. They will rush out ahead of things. They will ignore the consequences. They will try to externalize consequences. An issue with Saturn and Aries as well when it comes to leadership is domination. So trying to force an issue, being aggressive as a leader, using force, might makes right, basically. And we're going to get a huge amount of that with Neptune in Aries, but Saturn in Aries at times will fuel that, but it's also going to bring in consequences to these notions of might makes right as well. There will be blowback, and Saturn will absolutely provide that. So we should not be leading through domination or bravado or impulsive assertion, impulsive action. Hopefully as well, we can find authority and leadership in ourselves and around us that is not fueled by anger or hate either, because that is an easy way to get off of that integrity path, right? That said, one of the schadenfreude aspects to Saturn and Aries is that authority which is gained through force or performative leadership or ego will face massive difficulties. So again, everyone's getting put into the kiln. They're either going to come out much more beautiful and much more structurally sound, or they're going to melt under the pressure and break apart. So Saturn favors integrity. Those who are not utilizing that but are in a position of authority are going to run into problem after problem after problem. And we will have some absolutely stand out authority figures who show themselves to be ethical during this period of time, who show strategic, patient leadership, not trying to get a short-term win, but trying to get long-term justice. And this will be done by holding that sense of leadership within oneself with substance, an ability to listen, and an ability to not be beholden to one's own ego, to seek clarity through understanding other people, to uphold one's own ethical standards, and to be consistent, not this consequence-free pedal to the metal and then, slamming you and others into the wall. This is going to be about follow through, patience, consistency. So leadership is a major theme that's going to come up here. We're going to be talking a lot about the leaders that we have in the world, but we'll also be talking about how we can best carry our own authority and how we can best lead those around us or lead by example. Timing is also, as I mentioned, going to be a major issue. Saturn deals in long-term time frames. It's a big planner. It wants to know what's going on before it takes action and starts to move in a certain direction. And it wants for that to be really sound. Like I said, Aries is instant gratification, basically. Knowing what one wants and immediately going after it without any hesitation. There's going to be a huge stutter step issue with Saturn and Aries because Saturn will slow down Aries. But Aries is going to be pushing that Saturn to feel a sense of urgency to act. So there's going to be a lot of pressure and a lot of tension within that we're going to need to be able to maintain. Now, if we are able to maintain it, the level of productivity that we can have under this influence is going to be really excellent. And we should be able to learn through this period of time how to really masterfully control our energies and our output in such ways that are going to serve us for a very, very, very long time to come, of being able to push ourselves. But that pressure to act now is going to at times be a bit overwhelming. Sometimes we'll give in. That's okay, as long as we come back to center, as long as we come back to a sense of patience and level-headedness, and we're not doing this too often, and we're learning when that happens. That's usually what Saturn is going to ask, is when you do step out of line, learn the lesson, figure it out, try not to do it too much in the future. It also has a tendency, for better or worse, to make it very clear when we've screwed something up, If we're not avoiding consequences, we can definitely see them pretty quickly. So there will be major, major, major rewards for patience here, but that's not going to be the easiest thing to carry in ourselves. So on the destructive side of this is impatience and rushing through things. We'll see this on the global level. We will feel this in ourselves at times. Waiting for the right time to do things, I think, is going to be really huge too. If we're able to strike when the iron is hot and not just when we want to or when we are feeling that urge to, that's going to be big time rewarded here. So we can avoid a lot of potential self-sabotage here by managing our timing, by managing burnout and trying not to, again, rush, push, even when we run into obstacles. Negating those, denying those obstacles, the ability to slow us down, and then facing a sense of collapse or just seeking those short-term wins, those little bursts, but not planning long-term. But rather, endurance is going to beat out urgency for sure in the long term here. Discipline is going to help to prevent a sense of self-sabotage, trying to stay focused and trying to take focused long-term perspective action. That's going to be a lot better than just working in scattered bursts, because it's the scattered bursts, I think, that can lull us toward or pull us toward burnout, where we're not recognizing that it's going to happen before it winds up happening. So finding our rhythm in this is going to be really important. Applying that sustainable progress, not rushing. Also, establishing long-term habits. We can master ourselves. Mastery, Saturn of ourselves, Aries. That is something that we can definitely do with this. through the development of long-term habits and prioritizing those over short-term wins or instant gratification. So if we want to move forward during this period of time, it's going to be imperative that we slow down, that we really think things through, we try to be responsible, and that we are able to turn that patience into a sense of continual momentum. Conflict is another big theme here, where there's going to be better and worse ways to deal with it. We will be dealing with it. For those of us who, I have a lot of Pisces in me, love to avoid conflict, it's going to be something that we'll need to manage. Some people who are inclined toward that kind of thing will be more conflictual. People are going to be a bit more amped up with this energy. They're also, again, going to be carrying the tension of these paradoxes within themselves. Everyone is. So we're going to see that bubble up under the surface for people who carry this energy less well at times, and will also need to manage our interaction with those people too. So conflict, it's going to be unavoidable, but we are in control of ourselves with Saturn and Aries. That's ultimately all we are really responsible for. But the extent to which we can be patient, that we can emotionally regulate ourselves and have the habits, the tactics around anxiety or anger, frustration, those emotions that start to bubble up, the more knowledge that we can have around what makes us tick and how to self-soothe, the better. But if we are in a frazzled state of reacting each day, we will wind up finding that we misdirect our anger. So I wouldn't say to deny our anger, but trying to maintain that emotional regulation, go home, figure out where is the anger coming from, how can you utilize it constructively rather than having it blow back or have rougher consequences than necessary. Aggression is going to have consequences as well. So that is something that we should try to avoid as much as we possibly can. Of course, defending ourselves is great, but try to remain emotionally regulated if you do feel that you're on the defensive at all. Otherwise, aggression should just be basically a big no-no. Practicing humility as well is going to be really important here. There will be consequences for strong egos with Saturn and Aries too. So recognizing that, yes, we are individuals and we are building ourselves up, that we are ultimately only responsible for ourselves, that we're trying to be our best selves, etc. And we may see people acting really stupid outside of us, but hopefully we can keep in mind we're not perfect either. Anything that we can do to not let other people's out of control egos fuel our own, even if it's oh, wow, that's some really stupid action that I wouldn't take that's fueling that ego. Still, it can build us up a little bit too much. And humility will absolutely protect us and help us to develop the personal wisdom that we can with Saturn and Aries as well. Responding to any sort of aggressive people very strategically with our habits in mind. And also just trying to handle, like I said, with integrity, with our ethical framework intact and front of mind. That is how we should respond to and act upon most interactions during this period of time. So learning when to engage, when not to engage, any sort of righteous anger that we do wind up feeling from some of the things that we'll see in the world or some of the behaviors that we're going to wind up witnessing, trying to channel that into that very focused ethical action with emotional regulation to the extent that we can, trying not to have these impulsive reactions. That's going to serve us extremely well. Definitely a time where we're going to want to choose our battles wisely, to learn to back off of things that don't really matter. There's also going to be a major rebellious streak to the Saturn in Aries. Saturn in Aries is going to be building up structures which are quite contrary to what is already established, and this is inherently pretty rebellious. But we're going to need to utilize strategy during this period of time. If rebellion doesn't have a vision to fall back on, it can become very self-destructive. So again, keeping the ethical framework in mind as we are pushing ourselves in new directions through this period of time. If we are wanting to be more independent, if we are wanting to build up our confidence during this period of time, even if we are wanting to strike out on our own and worry less about what other people are going to think or whether they like it. Hopefully that in and of itself can even be rooted in, this is my vision of who I am and who I want to be, that is long-term, that is established, so that we're not just allowing for our egos to flail in any given direction in ways that could unnecessarily break down certain situations for us in our lives. So like friendships or other kinds of connections to people. Also, when it comes to notions of freedom, which are also very important for Aries, this needs to be built up patiently. This needs to be midwifed basically through this process. It needs to be cared for. It needs to be nurtured and incubated during this period of time, and doing so carefully and patiently. Another thing here, without a doubt, if you are at all, again, involved in community organizing or you're witnessing this, provocateurs are kind of a problem with Saturn in Aries. Sometimes there will be people in a position of authority that seem to be amidst the crowd with Saturn in Aries. And it's going to be important, again, to maintain emotional regulation, to not be provoked, because any sort of resistance to encroachments upon freedoms or liberties, that can definitely be manipulated if people aren't on the same page. And sorry, I just noticed that I typoed. Having cohesive principles is going to be really good to protect against that, and just kind of keeping our eyes open. Paying attention as well for contrarianism, because that's also not going to help here. Just destroying things for the sake of it, that's not creative destruction, that's just destruction. Creating a sense of chaos, that's not going to help to build a better and more comfortable world for us, ourselves, in our own lives, going our own way, even to spite ourselves, or out in the world. And it leaves us open, especially to co-optation or to negative influences in our own personal lives as well, if we are not truly anchored in an abiding sense of our own self and our own integrity. So where it's possible to do reform, where it's possible to get things done without a strong need to assert, that's going to be great. Taking those possibilities. Also trying to build up alternative frameworks. This is about building new structures with Saturn in Aries, and some of that is going to have to happen outside of the existing structures. So community aid, mutual aid, supporting each other. In our own personal lives, we'll also need to be building alternative frameworks if we're wanting to go our own way. So how do we plan that out before we start to take the steps? It's going to require more thought if we're going off the beaten path, and it's going to require more planning. So there's a lot of responsibility and accountability that goes into creating a completely new path and pioneering truly in the way that Aries likes to. And Saturn is going to provide us the tools to be able to do that, but it's also going to put some guardrails in place of consequences if we start to act very rashly. But again, I will say, when it comes specifically to like protests and resistance and things like that, with Saturn in Aries, it's going to be very favorable to architects of substantial change during this period of time. But we can't just break down or destroy the old world. What we need to do is have a different structure in place. Otherwise, things can wind up going really awry with Saturn and Aries. We're also going to be building up a huge amount of resilience during this period of time. That's one thing I'm kind of personally looking forward to. It's going to encourage that individuality that I've kept talking about. And this is why I also keep talking about, if you want to go your own way, pave your own path, that's going to be an urge a lot of us are going to want to have, to be our own authority. And that's going to encourage a huge amount of self-reliance. And that is wonderful. Not relying upon other people to have us feel like we're good, or to be able to take care of ourselves, or to be able to soothe us, but being able to take care of as much as we can of ourselves for ourselves. Because again, we are responsible deeply for ourselves with Saturn and Aries. But one little downside to that is that it can become a bit isolating. So try to watch out for loneliness and any symptoms of that may arise. A lot of us are going to be experiencing things like that. of not fully feeling understood because maybe we're going off on our own paths. So try not to let isolation stand in for a sense of freedom or personal liberation through this period of time. We should still be able to, at the very least, relate to other people as our fellow human beings, right? I know it gets harder and harder, but if we can respect the individuality of ourselves, we should absolutely be able to respect the individuality and the individual prerogatives of other people as well. And hopefully, therefore, not feeling the need to just withdraw from other people, especially out of a sense of fear, but rather building up a sense of self-reliance through skill building, through taking personal initiative, through developing our own dependability and our ability to depend on ourselves, but hopefully even being able to extend that to others here and there, being dependable with that understanding that independence is very compatible with interdependence, and that having community around you can strengthen your sense of autonomy rather than be a threat to it. But through focusing on these things, we can absolutely build a life that we can depend on ourselves, and we can persevere through any sort of fear and frustration that we may feel. During this period of time, we can figure out how we best manage obstacles by being really patient about moving around them during this period of time, by looking to the example set by others that we look to for authority and leadership outside of ourselves, even if they're not an authority over us. Their authority that they're taking over their own lives may be very inspirational to a lot of people as well. And maybe we can even then provide that inspiration to other people too. So being our own pioneers is going to be excellent, but we can't just survive alone. Human beings, even if we can provide for our bodies without a whole bunch of interconnection, we can't socially stay healthy without connecting to each other. This is also going to be speaking to Saturnian foundations. So we're going to be getting some Aries style foundations that we're working with here. That does mean starting, initiating, creating new foundations that we're going to be building on for decades to come. So this is a period of time where if there's something that you've been wanting to get off the ground, this is an excellent time to start and to build, because Aries can build. But it's going to be very important, again, to keep in mind the sustainability of these things. So moving beyond that point of starting and initiation to, is this something that is going to maintain my interest and that I'm going to be interested in and capable of sustaining long term, and planning for that. So the focus should be on long-term systems and structures that are going to serve us, creating those foundations, frameworks, and a reputation that is really rooted in our own personal individual values and what we are wanting for ourselves. Investing our energy in that and in durability, and not in flashes of anger or outburst or spectacle or performative emotion, basically, or performative kind of punitive behaviors, or an over-reliance on our ability to use force or abuse authority. That's going to wind up blowing back. I know there's going to be some people in positions of authority, like within workplaces, that wind up doing that, and it's going to be going sideways for a lot of people. Or even just the sensitive people in our own lives, being rude or trying to kind of get them on board and do things for us. That's not going to go over well with this. Boundaries are going to be really important, though. If you find yourself dealing with some people like that, one thing that Saturn and Aries can help with a lot is not just foundations, but boundaries, individual boundaries, being able to express those. And the more that you can have knowledge around emotional regulation during this period of time, you should get really adept at being able to put those up immediately as needed. Another thing that's going to be significant with Saturn and Aries is simplification. So stripping away what's unnecessary here. This isn't about fluff. It's not about flair. Again, it's not about performance. It's about building something very real. This is a pretty utilitarian kind of an alignment here. So building slowly, building deliberately with purpose, not for show. And trust that your patience is strengthening you big time and is maturing you and is going to make the utilization of patience in the future and effort in the future all that much more easier. Now, again, coming back to any sort of community efforts, global issues. With foundations too, it's going to be really important to keep in mind, what are we actually building? This isn't just about tearing stuff down. Saturn in Aries is going to be really great at doing that, but it's the frameworks that are going to be important. So what are we building here that's going to still stand as the conflict comes to a close? What's going to be there? What will we have built out of this moment? So finally, to put a bow on this, I have some primary warnings here, and then the better way of utilizing this transit. I'm just going to let those primary warnings stand for themselves, and you can see them there. I want to focus in on what we can get out of this. Saturn in Aries has proven itself through history to be periods of time of a lot of cultural blossoming. It tends to put some young people into positions of self-authority, to where they're not just taking in the pop culture and living those lives and so forth. They're actually thinking, they're actually doing, they're actually building things that are new and that are more vibrant. So that is something that's going to be nice to look to out in the collective, out in the world. And it should be something that we should be supporting. I will say we had Saturn in Aries in the late 60s, when young people were very rebellious, and there was some of the best music certainly coming out during that time. So I'm hoping we get some pretty solid music out of this as well. But those countercultures and that rebellion, think back to that period of time. That's going to be an echo that we see now. So that's going to be the kind of rebelliousness that we see. And the Saturn in Aries is going to support that as long as it's necessary. If freedom and liberty and individual rights are getting trampled upon, Saturn is going to call people to be their own authority and to step out and to be a wall against that. So that's not going to stand. And that's part of the reason why I keep saying any sort of top-down domination or insane leadership, things like this, really awful authority figures, it's just not going to work, because people aren't going to stand for it. This is going to scrutinize the living heck out of authority. Saturn will do it on its own. It's going to scrutinize the heck out of any aggression as well. And it will instill its own consequences. But again, people too, with Saturn in Aries, are going to be encouraged to scrutinize authority on their own. And so when it comes to voting habits and things that people are doing in response to how authority is being carried and leadership figures, those consequences will come through people and through universal law as well. This is going to teach us a huge amount of endurance and how to build things, how to start from scratch, and not just in a negative way, but how to spur ourselves into action that requires a huge amount of courage to get started on, but ultimately is going to initiate something that is going to be quite easy to maintain once we're through the Saturn and Aries period of time. But if we get it started now and we work with this energy, it's kind of like working with a weighted bat. It's going to make us a lot stronger. And then when it comes down to it down the road, that whole thing is going to be a lot easier. This is also going to encourage and reward authenticity, being ourselves, being pioneers, respecting the authenticity of other people. So respecting others' autonomy, respecting our own autonomy, allowing for difference of opinion, and yet following the guidance of our own personal experience, trusting our own eyes and ears and mind when it comes to what is true. This will require, but again, it's going to help to build self-discipline and self-authority too. So if that is something that you've struggled with, if you do look outside of yourself, if you have a bit of self-doubt, if you have some insecurities, if that's been something that you've worked on for a while, I would really set some intentions to try to push through that and try to overcome that with Saturn and Aries, because it's going to help out a lot when it comes to that. Saturn is much better seen as a very formidable teacher rather than a punisher, in my view. It's going to help us to build a lot during this time. So a couple other things I just wanted to point out here. Saturn's going to be in Aries with Neptune, and especially initially, it's going to look like it is reinforcing the Neptune in Aries might makes right delusion that we've already been hearing stated overtly since last summer when we had Saturn and Neptune in Aries. Please don't overly fret. That's not going to last. It's going to wind up blowing back big time. And it will show leadership what true authority is and who actually makes the laws, which is Saturn and Jupiter, right? And what's interesting too is that Saturn and Neptune tend to point to disillusionment. And I think that that's going to be one of the latter disillusionment phases, is those who are buying into might makes right. There's no such thing as international law, blah, 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 all this stuff. That is going to be proven very much not the case. Through this process, it's going to run into a lot of walls with Saturn and Aries. And that may be the final big Saturn-Neptune conjunction lesson about the illusions that we carry. This is also going to reinforce the Uranus and Gemini tendency to cause some fracturing. Mars and Saturn, part of why they're considered to be malefics, there's many different reasons, but part of it is that they have a separating kind of a tendency to them. Venus and Jupiter bring things together. Those are the benefics. Mars and Saturn pull things apart. Those are the malefics. And so it can cause some fracturing. It can step in to deny certain aspects, to deny certain things. Some initiations, basically, initiations is the word that I'm looking for. Initiatives, that's the word that I'm looking for. Some initiatives that are started with Saturn and Aries are going to break apart. They will wind up fracturing. Uranus in Gemini is also going to cause some fracturing, usually to more existing frameworks and structures with Uranus and Gemini. But they're breaking new ground. And that, I think, is going to be very fascinating. That's where so much of this like cultural blossoming, creating new things, creating a new world for us to live in, is going to wind up coming in quite a bit. So some final things I'll say about this is to live your values very visibly and consistently. This is going to help you in building the structures and the reputation that you want in your own life, but it's also going to provide an example for all of the rest of us, all of the rest of the world. We're all going to need to build each other up in this time and to provide good examples of strength and tenacity in these coming couple of years, especially with so many people looking for what their role should be to resist encroachments. Authenticity is going to be number one in all of that, leading by example and really embodying integrity instead of just trying to play a role. So what is it that we are truly wanting to build here in our own lives, in our own communities, in our world? This is the kickoff point. Saturn is going to be doing the bidding of Neptune as well, which we're going to be getting into again next week. And we're going to look at that a bit more from a personal perspective. I'm going to hit the top notes when it comes to global considerations, but I do really want to personalize that because I feel like we have looked at Saturn and Neptune from a global perspective quite a lot. So again, stay tuned for that. So with all of that said, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really greatly appreciate everyone for being here. I hope that everyone is doing really well. I know that things are weird in the US right now for many different reasons. So I hope that everyone has power and everyone is feeling safe. Really, no matter where you are in the world, we will definitely see the other side of a lot of this. And Saturn and Aries is going to help out quite a bit. So with that said, again, if you did enjoy this video and you don't mind giving it a like or hype, I would really greatly appreciate that. And if you're interested in content like this, typically we'll look at specific alignments in the sky and we'll break it down into collective portion and like global considerations. And then we'll take that through sign by sign. On the Saturn and Aries video and the Saturn Neptune in Aries video, I think we're going to do things a little bit differently where we weave those things together. But if those things are of interest to you, definitely consider sticking around by subscribing. There's also information in the description box below for membership perks, if that is something that you're interested in. We do weekly forecasts where we break down day by day what to expect of the energies, as well as monthly sessions. We're currently going through deep dives into the house meanings. And I think we might do an Aries ingress. Maybe we'll see if that is something that people are interested in. But yeah, there's information about that below. And thank you so much to the members of this channel for all of your support. So thank you so much to Angel Niblock, JJ, Michelle Howell, Deborah Keel-Leavitt, Patrick McKenney, Jody, Anne Marie, C. Rezer, Peace Out, Rachel Windholtz, Aya, Lynn Newman, Long T Standing, The Nelson Cat Maya, Connie DiMartino, Deli Gizi, Mango JT, Be Love, Startlingly True, Psyche Lloyd, Noah, Aquarian Antiquarian, Susan Martin, Chad W., Jonathan Mason, Adrienne K., SP, Teresa Jones, Sherry Lee is, Horse Dog Dog Notebook, Nioke Beam, Justice League Pie, Ashley Gonzalez, Create, Gail's Tarot and Astrology, Talitha McKenzie, K from NH, Patar Music, Nancy Imhoff, Peta Carlin, Sarah MCAP, Angela Lazaire, Travis Dandro, Jane Bevan, Helena Fisher, Tina Reynolds, Sacred Alpaca, Natasha P., Indy Loon, Susie Fetter, Linda Skull, Mehernush Amiri, Mari Garcia, D. Fish, Ellen McCormick Martins, Black Sheep Pink Unicorn, Someone77, Attunement Tarot, Cookerzilla Joshua Owen, J.A., Carrie Affronti, Mike, Lynn Ching, Kiska Kuznetsova, Linda Osborne, Denise Gould, Many Stars, E.F., Zoe, Plamena Melanova, The Muslim Researcher, Dante Hill, Cameron Walker, Larissa F., A. Neon, Marlo Murphy, Allison Arthurson, Janelle S., Danny C., Janet McCann, Gameen, CPT Alpha 12, Alina Bloomgarden, AC, Mina Dobras, NG, Sydney, Rebecca Cortez, Mike Jonesy Boy, Ricky Dandridge, Novocaine, Brandy Williams, Allison Elliott, Mason HKW, MA, Adya Freya, Willow Raven, Psychics and Mediums, Nat Catnip, Shane V, Jesse, Aaron Paterson, Shell Hawkins, Amanda Emmons, Brenda Tucker, This Is It, My Friend, Tracy Gerdine, Sabrina Simon, JL, Grounded Fire, Shadow and Soul Revolution, Esther Swan, Victoria Gordon, Lizzie Willow, Emily Zoe, Patricia Cogley, Rachel Y, Alex T, Bella, Pepe Ivanova, Ali Casanova, Ruby Payne, Valerie Hamilton, Elsie, Gabriel Pages, Blue Abila, Jody Gonzalez, Sunshine, Cat Alien, Nita Singh, Catherine Rose Conlu, Rebecca Fusetti, Anna Jordan, Roxette De La Cruz, I Hate 1988, Patricia Ewing, Sylvia C., Anya G., Yorena Martin, Jennifer Arena, Ren, Margox, Anna Cedarquist, Madcap Vlogs, Veronica Dubiel, Linda McCallum, Padme Moonflower, Jenny Tron, Joey M., B., Desiree Hamlin, Maria Paula Major, Blue Flame, Self-Carry, Katie Scarlett, Mercurius Luna, Sandra Anderson, Marlena Kimber, Giselle Christine, Sasha Star Garden, Danny Baneyful, Stacy Starkey, Christy Pops MC, Lakshana, and Mused Wellness. Thank you all so much for your support. Much love to you. And without any further ado, let's get into the sign by sign. All right, so for Aries, we have Saturn and Aries transiting through your first house. And this is the house of you, yourself, your identity, your persona, the mask you wear out in the world, how you approach life, how you see life, how you see your place within the world, and basically where the world meets you. So you're interfacing with all of the world as well. And so this is going to be having you taking yourself and your role and your personal goals very seriously and putting a lot of effort into self-improvement and discipline and achievement in the coming couple of years here. So you may feel a major increase in personal responsibility. A lot of that is going to be independently derived. So you setting out rules and guidelines for yourself that you're following. So huge focus on achieving personal goals here. But you may find that some of that does come from the outside as well, of just the onus being on you for a lot of things. So people needing things from you, people putting you in a position of authority such that you're kind of calling the shots even outside of yourself. And that can require a lot of effort and energy as well. And people coming to you for answers, basically. This is going to be a period of time where you are developing a huge amount of personal wisdom, but we will discuss that a little bit more next week when we talk about the fact that Neptune is also in this house in the coming couple of years by transit for you. So this is also causing you to restructure fundamentally your identity itself. So looking at yourself very, very differently. If you have seen yourself as quite excitable and adventurous and bold and all this, maybe even specifically youthful and fun-loving, this is going to be having you take yourself more seriously and look at yourself much more so like a grown-up, an adult, a responsible person. Not that you haven't on some level, but this is definitely going to be encouraging looking at yourself in that way and putting yourself in those positions as well. And then reinforcing that aspect of your identity too. Now, this is also going to encourage a huge amount of resilience through some tests. So you will be put into positions where you're going to need to rise to the occasion. And I very much doubt that you will not rise to the occasion in any given scenario. The only thing that could really trip you up in a serious way when it comes to developing resilience in these coming years is going to be impatience. That is something that you may struggle with a little bit with Aries, and Saturn doesn't do well with impatience. It rules long periods of time. So this isn't about instant gratification. This isn't just about building up your sense of authority in this moment or today. This is about truly establishing real authority in your life and control over yourself and your decisions and the long-term impact on your life of your day-to-day instantaneous decisions. So that's going to be a huge factor here. So building that long-term authority and confidence in yourself, developing really long-term personal goals for yourself, and then setting out to achieve them over the course of a couple of years and just putting one foot in front of the other, not getting instant rewards for this. But certainly by the end of a couple of years, you will see that you've gone leaps and bounds just by putting one foot in front of the other. And you're very likely to see also by the end of this that other people are looking at you a lot differently, not just looking at you as an authority figure on some topic, but that you carry yourself with that level of confidence and hopefully approachability as well. Also, when it comes to self-assertion, this is going to favor that being applied in a very even-handed, quiet confidence kind of a way as well. So self-assuredness that doesn't need to push too hard, that doesn't need to be too impulsive, that's going to serve you really well here as well. So disciplined self-assertion is going to be a really important factor in this. Also, sustainable energy application. So you may work pretty well in fits and starts, and initially this may seem to work for that. But what you may find is that if you are working in fits and starts with the Saturn in Aries, that you're going to hit a wall, and that the moments where you're wanting to just quickly get something done, that you kind of can't get anything done. But if you had been applying sustained energy, maybe you would have still met a deadline or something like this. This should help you to apply your energy in a more even and balanced way throughout long periods of time so that you're able to be more productive, more efficient, more structured with your personal goals and your accomplishments and achievements and things like that. And then therefore be able to better gauge and measure your success and your achievement and the amount of responsibility that you are able to shoulder day to day as well. So yeah, this is just structuring you a whole lot and bringing a lot of responsibility, but also bringing the rewards of that, especially if you're able to lean into patience with yourself, with other people. If you were able to really focus on carrying yourself with a lot of integrity and accountability, then one thing that I'm going to point out next week, Neptune's going to be saying is that for you, there is no real limit to what you're able to achieve. And this Saturn's going to help you to actually build that out and make that real in the coming couple of years. But yeah, I do hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Taurus, we have Saturn in Aries transiting through your 12th house. And this is a place of your deep internal private life, your inner world. This is a place of your own solitude where you go and you don't necessarily share from that place. This is also a place of your imagination, your subconscious, sometimes fears, and even self-sabotaging behaviors, subconscious patterns, and things like this can show up in this place. So unresolved emotions and psychological hangups and things like that tend to show up in the 12th house. So I will say this is likely to increase solitude, but not necessarily in a way that is the way that we would look at it as like loneliness or something. This is very likely to have you quite productive and constructive and able to get things done in a way that you like in solitude on your own. So being very self-motivated, being internally motivated with Saturn in the 12th house here. And especially if this is playing into you establishing greater boundaries, you may feel that you are just pulling fully back a lot, that you're almost withdrawing quite a bit in order to get clear on where those boundaries should be, what you like, what you don't like, what's acceptable, what's not. I would accept a little bit of like floundering and being a bit wishy-washy on that here and there, especially if that's something that you are learning about, that you're picking up on. And I wouldn't be shy to withdraw at times. Again, it's going to be helpful ultimately. It will be constructive to withdraw at times with Saturn transiting through your 12th. You may even, or rather other people may find that you kind of disappear for a while and then come out having done something really cool. This is also likely to increase your sense of spirituality, how seriously you take your spiritual connections and spiritual rules. So trying to find or follow like spiritual laws of karma, universal laws, things like this, and basing your behavior on what you feel are those kind of universal rules and things like that. And then also spiritual discipline. So when it comes to practice, being a lot more consistent with that. And then also any well-being practices too. So yoga or energy work, gratitude, all of that, being much more disciplined with that too. And you may be intentionally working on trying to break down or to end some long-standing karmic cycles. So this may be fundamentally spiritual in nature, trying to realign yourself, trying to take like spiritual hygiene very seriously, and being willing to purge and sacrifice that which feels like it's getting in the way of that. And that may be some of what you're withdrawing from. This can also help to break any bad habits that you may have, whether it be substances or, again, behaviors or dependencies upon people that aren't the greatest for you, etc. Anything that is self-sabotaging, you can see that a lot more clearly with Saturn there. It's going to give you a realistic view of that, which may feel critical. I would focus a lot less on critiquing yourself about habits. We all have weird habits, but rather than focus on the constructive addressing of those patterns or habits or, self-sabotaging tendencies that you may have. The 12th house also has to do with hidden enemies. And I would not be surprised, I hate to say this, but I would not be surprised if there were to be something that you would learn about along those lines that catalyzes withdrawal. Saturn can tend to do things in this way. It can put us into obstacles that it wants for us to respond to in a specific kind of a way. So teaching you a way around, depending on people who aren't good for you, by teaching you more so through putting you in that position and then having you withdraw, teaching you more about internal resilience and independence from influences like that, and paying attention to those subtle energetic influences as well. This may not be a straightforward kind of a thing. This can just be being around negative Nellies and the impact that can have on you. That can even be sabotaging. So also when in isolation, when working on these things internally, you may find yourself really confronting headlong some fears or self-doubt, any long-standing burnout, or just feeling like there's been a wet blanket over your life for like a decade or something annoying like that. That Saturn is helpful in the sense that it can point out what all is underlying that and why that is. And it can also get you a lot more comfortable with spending that time on your own that's required to not distract yourself from getting at underlying reasons of things that are internal in terms of patterns and so forth. So by pulling you out of your routine, by pulling you out of the external influences and things like this, it should be able to make any emotional patterns, self-doubt, fears, self-sabotaging behaviors, inhibitions, self-limiting beliefs of any sort, making them clear and then helping you to put in the effort that's necessary to get on top of all of that. And ultimately what this is doing is it's helping you to clear out and restructure your inner world, your subconscious, your patterns, your behavior, in order to prepare you for Saturn moving into your first house in 2028, where it's going to be more about taking on overt, open authority, being an authority figure, taking yourself and your personal goals out in the open world much more seriously and running with it. So a lot of this is preparation time. And these transits are likely to be pretty quiet a lot of the time, but I wouldn't doubt that you're going to be spending quite a bit of time in quietude in the coming couple of years and sorting things out internally. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Taurus. I will be discussing next week how Neptune in this house, transiting through this house with Saturn, is also going to be flavoring the coming couple of years. So stay tuned for that if that is of interest. Other than that, I hope this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Gemini, we have Saturn in Aries transiting through your 11th house. And this is the house of your social life generally, your social aspirations, the social groups that you belong to. A lot of friends show up in this house, as well as social expectations and pressures. So this is a really wonderful house. Allies and benefactors tend to show up here, as well as groups of people, in addition to a lot of hopes and dreams and aspirations and things like this. So with Saturn transiting through this house in the coming couple of years, this is going to be causing you to take very seriously and put a lot of effort into these areas of your life. So your friendships, any communities that you belong to, any groups that you lead, you're likely to have a greater sense of authority within all of those connections, to be holding your own, and possibly because you have to. For instance, if you belong to a certain group, there may be an authority figure that's stepping down, and it is requiring you then to step into that position, which may increase your level of responsibility and the effort that you're then needing to put into that group. This can even be among colleagues, so you could see this in your working life particularly, but it's likely to be very much about the social impact or the impression that you're making upon people, rather so much than things that you are basically establishing for your CV. This is more about establishing a network of people that take you very seriously. So still very beneficial, but it's a little bit different. Also, in terms of your long-term goals and your social aspirations, even when it comes to lifestyle, what are the social circumstances in which you're wanting to be? So what kind of roles, what kind of status are you wanting to create for yourself? This is going to have you taking that very seriously and structuring your life in such a way that you're able to take steps to get yourself closer and closer to that vision that you're after, that long-term plan, those long-term goals. You may also just find that the people that you're connecting with are a little bit more serious too. So this could be that your friends are maturing quite a bit, or that you're spending more time, again, with like career networking kinds of groups rather than just let's go out and have fun kinds of groups. If there's a lot that you do which is reputational, like if you do marketing or you work with clients or you're publishing or anything like this, this transit is also going to be very helpful to establish yourself as an authority figure when it comes to all of that too. Now, this may also restructure some of your connections, as in some pruning or removing some connections, some friendships from your life. Now, that may not have to be this kind of explosive breakdown of a friendship drama kind of a situation. It could be, but it totally doesn't need to be. This can just be that you are growing apart from certain people, that you're noticing that there are certain influences that aren't really going to get you where you're wanting to go, that you've maybe outgrown some of your connections. And so you may find that you have fewer connections, but that those are stronger and that they are of a better influence for you, that they're more reliable and that they're more beneficial for you. And coming back to this aspirational aspect of the 11th house too, when it comes to your aspirations and what it is that you're trying to achieve for yourself, again, especially when it comes to lifestyle and like social status kinds of things, what's really helpful is that you're able to make those goals concrete, structured, more straightforward and achievable. You're able to be very realistic about what you're able to achieve and then take the action steps and put the effort into making those things real. So strategy and effort are also going to be really important here. I'm going to talk about this a bit more when we discuss Neptune also being in this house next week. But that 1-2 punch is really interesting and cool to have in the 11th house, because Neptune is very like dream big. There's no limits on what you're able to aspire to. But Saturn makes it more real because it's willing to put the effort in that can make that concrete and can crystallize those circumstances that you're reaching for into your life. So do try to structure out, what are your dreams? What do you aspire to? What roles do you want to play? What kind of social impact do you want to have? What kind of influence over people do you want to have? And then as long as you are using integrity in those connections and you are carrying your authority in a way that's very accountable, you should be able to get really very far in the coming couple of years here when it comes to your goals. But yeah, I think that for now is what I have for you, Gemini. So I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Cancer, we have Saturn in Aries transiting through your 10th house. And your 10th house has to do with your public life, your role, your position in the world, your reputation. If you have a traditional career path that you're following, it is very much represented in the 10th house. Your ambitions, your accomplishments, success, etc., public status. So you'll be taking this area of life extra seriously throughout the coming couple of years. You may find that there is a lot of responsibility that you're dealing with, and that may or may not be by choice. You may be put into a position where the responsibility is increased quite a bit. I wouldn't necessarily say to shy away from that kind of thing, because Saturn usually does wind up bringing rewards for the effort that you wind up putting in. Although there may be at times with Saturn in your 10th house where you will need to establish some stronger boundaries when it comes to your work. Your integrity will also very much be on display with Saturn in your 10th house. So being very accountable and carrying a lot of integrity is also going to go really far with this. It's going to help out a lot. You're also much more likely to be in a position of authority with this transit too. So this can speak to increased responsibility and accountability and authority because you've been given a promotion or you've been put into a different position. And that can wind up posing some tests around your reputation, around your leadership style, around your work ethic. So being really clean and clear on that is going to be great. And especially if you're able to be really clear with yourself about your life direction and what you're really wanting. The more seriously that you want what you are actively going after during this period of time, the more likely that it is to pay off. If you're off track, though, you could look at this as a silver lining. Saturn's likely to throw you out of a situation if you're not on the right track. And so it can put you on the right track with a huge amount of your own effort, but it may need to do so by removing you from situations that aren't really for you. So that is something to keep in mind. I wouldn't necessarily say give 110% of your effort into a direction that you know isn't really for you anyway. Rather, with this quite independent Saturn in Aries, what I would say in that case is there some major seed of desire that you have to go independent? And is there a path forward for that? We'll talk about it a bit more next week, but Neptune is also going to be in this house for you, removing a lot of the previous limits to situations like that you may have experienced before. And Saturn will enable you to put all of the effort and energy that you'll need into building an independent business up, if that's something that you're wanting to do. So ultimately, a huge amount of slow but lasting professional progress. Be patient with the developments. Try not to get out in front of your skis. There's a bit of a stop-go energy to Saturn and Aries. So the patience is even more important when Saturn is in the sign. And again, coming back to defining what success truly means for you, yourself. Not what that means for other people, not trying to compete with others, not comparing yourself to others, but what do you really want for your legacy to look like, for you to be satisfied with your own life and your own direction. Try to go after that as much as you possibly can. And yeah, if you do need to get off of a certain track, I would expect for that to come through under the guise of a structural breakdown or a confrontation with authority that is no longer tenable for you to stick with. These are the kinds of things that I would expect to show up in order to light a fire under you, to get you onto the more correct track for you, and to put you in a greater sense of control and authority over your own life direction. So yeah, even if there are little bumps in the road with this, it will pay off. Good, clean effort is excellent. Try and make sure that you know what your desired destination is and that you're headed somewhat in that direction, or at least that you're planning toward that direction. And this should wind up just being somewhat straightforward, putting a lot of work into work. But yeah, that is pretty much what I have for you, Cancer. So I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Leo, we have Saturn in Aries transiting through your 9th house. Your 9th house has to do with your conceptual framework of the world, basically, your worldview, your philosophy, your sense of your place within the world. This is where you are able to expand your horizons either through direct experience, like traveling, going to unfamiliar places, or through exercise of your mind, so higher learning. Study, deepening your understanding, spirituality, things like this. So a lot of your belief system is in this 9th house, especially on that broad kind of global level. So this is going to have you taking that all very seriously and putting a lot of effort into this. So you may find yourself reading a lot or studying a lot. You may even be encouraged to take some courses that may or may not be related to your working life, but may just be philosophical or for pleasure, or to, again, expand your mind and your horizons. If you are studying, if you are in school, this is, again, just going to have you taking that very seriously and putting a lot of effort into it. It may also require a lot of effort. If you are a student, for instance, this could be moving into upper division kinds of coursework that is just a lot more rigorous. But also when it comes to your belief systems, your worldview, trying to structure that with Saturn here, like taking that more seriously, where it's not just kind of going through your day-to-day life and weighing things up as they come along, but trying to create a structured framework of right and wrong and what's true and what's not, and what you value and what is less valuable to you, what you support, what you don't support, and so on. And again, especially with regard to what you feel like your place is in the world. So this could even have you advocating along the lines of your views, stepping into an authority position and teaching and espousing your views on things. One thing I would say is that this can be a bit rigid or a bit ideological. And so that's one thing that I would watch out for a bit, is being too rigid in your worldview, because this can tempt you. It can tempt you to oversimplify a bit. Both Saturn and Aries really appreciate simplification. And so trying to break things down like that is great, but maybe try not to force that onto other people as well. Now, you may also find yourself experiencing tests of faith that are causing you to take these things all more seriously. So it may just be that you are going through your life and something winds up cropping up that causes you to question your whole notion of, how things usually go. Or if I do this, then that's going to happen. If that is proven to not be the case, that could have you questioning basically your whole logical framework, right? Your whole sense of reasoning. And so whether it comes to karma or like universal laws, those can even wind up coming into question here, these philosophical assumptions about the world and the meaning that you give to life as well, and your experience of life. So trying to enrich that experience of life through taking it seriously and putting a lot of effort into understanding that on a deeper level. Now, when it does come to learning and even teaching, you can be in a position of teaching with Saturn moving into your ninth house too. Having things structured and well organized is going to be really helpful along those lines. And also if you are publishing at all, be that videos, be that public speaking, or actually like publishing your words, and whether that be self-publishing or a blog or books or anything like that. Structure will help a lot with that. And it's likely that what you publish is going to be taken seriously with Saturn there if you're putting in good effort and things are structured and clear. Also, any sort of legal considerations that are coming up, they may be somewhat unclear at times, especially as Neptune's going to be in this place as well. I'm going to talk about that a bit more next week, but being patient and trying to make sure that you are as clear as you can be and that you're putting in the effort, you're not sweeping things under the rug. That's all going to be really helpful. But also any sort of international travel or going outside of your usual stomping grounds, expecting delays, expecting little obstacles here and there, and therefore planning for that is also going to be quite helpful. So be patient with those areas of life. And finally, building wisdom through your lived experience, through what you are able to see and hear for yourself, what you know from your direct experience. That's going to be a lot better than trying to use this time to structure and create and espouse a super clean, straightforward, very punchy, maybe even kind of punitive worldview or ideology that isn't actually reflective of lived experience. So try to always be checking your beliefs against what you've actually seen and heard and witnessed, and try not to oversimplify or to put too many people just like in boxes, things like that, because that's where Saturn can get a little bit tripped up. But rather, there's an opportunity here to build up a huge amount of wisdom through exercising patience and not jumping to conclusions, learning as much as you possibly can, taking a lot of responsibility for what you believe and what you espouse, what you put out there into the world, and also taking very seriously personal growth and development. Again, especially another video I'm going to do in probably a few months here is going to be about the fact that Jupiter will be in Leo and will create trines to the Saturn, which is going to help a lot with the personal growth aspect of it for you as well. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you for now. So I do hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Virgo, we have Saturn in Aries is transiting through your 8th house. And your 8th house is pretty complex. It has to do with, quote unquote, the resources of others that you are tied to. But there's so much more to it than that. So there is the financial dynamic there, but there's also matters of karmic ties, emotional bonds, psychological complications and dependencies, matters of fear and trust and loss and control, and especially where all of that has to do with your connections to other people. So straightforwardly, when it comes to your financial ties, that is very likely to be restructured in the coming couple of years. There may be some dependencies either that are established in order to teach you some valuable skills or lessons, things like that. Or this could be a restructuring that you are bringing in order to create greater independence for yourself or to establish a firmer foundation with a partner. So a lot of potential financial restructuring regarding your shared resources, and then also any debts or taxes. It's very likely that you're going to be taking very seriously paying those kinds of things off and wanting to get those things off of your back, and being willing to put a huge amount of effort into getting that done, making that happen for yourself. You may be learning finances and budgeting and things like that a lot more through these years than is typical for you, or that you have before, basically. So coming off of the financial aspect of this, there's likely to be a lot to do with resilience in this place too, that's going to be coming up in the coming couple of years, where you're developing a huge amount of resilience that you may not have known that you had up until this point. So being able to step up when other people drop the ball, being able to, again, maybe create a strong foundation for yourself, regardless of what other people are doing, of refusing to connect with certain relationships or partnerships that you know aren't going to be good for you. And so when it comes to the temptations of dependency, there's likely to be some tests during these years along those lines, but you don't have to give in to them at all. And even if you do, you're likely to learn some really valuable stuff from that anyway. And when it comes to any previous traumas or challenges of your boundaries in the past, or dealing with manipulative people or challenging people or unwell people that you've experienced in the past, this Saturn is able to show you very realistically what all took place there, why, like the underlying currents of why these things took place, and enabling a fundamental restructuring of any sort of foundations that may have led you into those kinds of situations in the past. So absolutely enabling psychological work, processing any sort of trauma, cutting any sort of trauma bonds that you may have. And when it comes to your own personal fears around independence or around dependencies, around trust, around betrayal, around loss, around power dynamics and things like this, also taking that very seriously. You may be studying these things quite in depth and confronting them with knowledge and with deeper and deeper understanding. And therefore, again, like I said, developing resilience through a deeper understanding of your own boundaries, what you bring to the table, what you expect from others, what is healthy, what is not, what is balanced, etc. So this is helping a lot with long-term empowerment through a sense of self-mastery. So again, not giving into the temptations of dependence on others or sweeping things under the rug, going along to get along, but rather relying deeply on a sense of self-trust, resilience, and independence is what the Saturn in Aries is going to be teaching in this 8th house here. Now, this doesn't have to negate any sort of financial or karmic or emotional or psychological ties that you have that are pretty good for you, that aren't a problem, basically. In those cases, you're just taking those things a lot more seriously. There's more of an accounting of that. There's more of a deeper understanding of those connections and those expectations. But yeah, I think that's a lot of what I have for you, specifically with regard to Saturn in this 8th house of yours for the coming couple of years. Next week, we're going to look at this in the context of Saturn and Neptune, because Neptune will also be in this house for you in the coming couple of years. So feel free to check that out to get a little deeper into this. But other than that, I hope this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Libra, we have Saturn in Aries transiting through your 7th house. And this is the house of other people that you typically are close to. It's the other half. So This can be as distant as the other party in some dispute, but typically what it shows up as is how you relate to others abstractly, conceptually, and then close friends, close partners, business partners, romantic partners, people like this. So this is going to have you taking those connections very seriously. Now, you probably already do as a Libra, but this is going to have you looking at those questions of how you relate, matters of give and take, matters of responsibility and obligations with people, whether that's a two-way street, etc. So it's going to be having you scrutinize them a little bit more than usual during this period of time. And this may wind up presenting some tests to some of your close connections. So are people holding their own? Are they being considerate of you on the same level that you are of others? And I say that in particular because as a Libra, typically there is a tendency to overgive a bit, and things can be a bit unbalanced, especially for a Libra rising in terms of a bit too much take on the other side. So with that Saturn coming through your 7th house, I really would not be surprised if you're taking that issue just a lot more seriously during this time, and that you're demanding a bit more in your partnerships. Now, this can also point to people needing you more, so feeling that you are also more responsible for other people, but just try and make sure that there's some semblance of balance in those connections. So there's going to be a couple different ways that this can wind up going. Some of your commitments are going to wind up strengthening and deepening. Saturn can make things very long term, but it can also break things apart if they aren't very strong. And so some close relationships are likely to come apart, and some are likely to become very long term and to wind up standing the test of time as they work through some of the tests that come up in the coming couple of years. So a lot here about learning boundaries, expressing your boundaries, being very firm about those, not allowing for them to sway, depending on how you're feeling at a given time, or if you're feeling conflict averse or something like this. Also, accountability within relationships and connections, making fewer excuses for people and maybe for yourself in some of your connections as well. And developing a strategy of assertion, self-assertion in your connections. So when push comes to shove and you need to put your foot down, this is going to be helpful to teach you strategies that you can use long-term around that. And finally, maturing your approach to collaboration and conflict, becoming a bit less conflict averse with this alignment, being willing to stand your ground and not budge on certain issues, again, especially your boundaries and matters of fairness within connections and partnerships, not being willing to put all of the onus on you all of the time, and being willing to back that up through the strong words that may be required if that is trampled upon. So not shying away from dealing with things head on in your connections in the coming couple of years. And that should teach you some really excellent strategies that you're able to use for some time to come. Because like I said, especially for Libra rising, there is a tendency to be a bit overly flexible with people and to overlook certain complications from other people. And that can create an unbalanced situation that ultimately leaves you feeling frustrated. So certainly that should be much less of an issue by the end of this couple of years, but there are going to be some tests for you in the meantime in order to teach you those skills. Yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Libra. It is rather straightforward. So I hope that it treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Scorpio, we have Saturn in Aries transiting through your 6th house. And your 6th house has to do with your daily routines, the things that you have to do, obligations, responsibilities, the effort that you put into things. So a lot of your daily workday life shows up in this house. Also any sort of other obligations. So chores, errands, all of that. So this is likely to have you taking all of this a lot more seriously and putting a lot more effort into this area of life. And at times this may be because it's required. So you may have a heavier workload. You may have more responsibilities when it comes to your workday. You may be responsible for more chores around the house, things like this. And I would say, especially in this year, I'll talk about this at some point because I know I want to talk about the trines that are coming up from Jupiter. But for you in particular, this Saturn stuff is likely to get quite well rewarded because of the fact that what we have is Saturn in your sixth, showing that you're putting a lot of effort into your work and the quality of it and so forth and getting things done. And then that is going to be making multiple trines in the sky to Jupiter in your 10th, which can point to, okay, and you're getting rewarded through recognition and maybe promotion or a raise or something like that when it comes to your career. So even though it may sound annoying that there may be more responsibility, it's very likely that you will genuinely be rewarded for that at some point in this or next year as well, because of where Jupiter is also going to be. So the level to which you can be disciplined in your daily life is going to be very helpful. If you can structure these things, if you can get more organized, more streamlined, that's going to be great. One thing that Aries and Saturn can get on the same page about is simplification. So trying to remove some of the fluff from your day, try to remove some of the distractions from your day. That's going to be excellent. And that'll help a lot then to manage your workload as well. You may even find that you're getting a huge amount of satisfaction just through the pride that you're able to take in what you're getting done. Now, your work environments can also become more Saturnian, so a bit more hierarchical, a bit more structured, a bit more demanding, somewhat less fun. There may be a bit of a wet blanket when it comes to your working life. I hope that's not the case, but if that becomes somewhat unbearable, another thing that Saturn does encourage is boundaries. And so there may well be a point in time in the coming couple of years here where you're needing either to establish some boundaries within your working life if too much is getting delegated to you, or so that you don't burn yourself out, or you may need to step away from and leave a certain situation for something that's more comfortable, that feels better. And if that is the case, it's very likely because of some hierarchical or structural disagreement that you're having with that environment, basically. Another thing I would preach pretty strongly with this is sustainability. So like I said, when it comes to burnout, if there's too much of a workload, Saturn can do two different things, which can be a bit annoying. On the one hand, it can have you following through, even when you're burnt out, still getting all your stuff done, which on the one hand is nice in the short term, but in the long term, man, can that wind up taking a huge toll. And so I would really recommend paying attention to how sustainable is the place that you're at with regard to how much stuff you've got to get done and what that's leading to. If you're at a continually worsening deficit of energy and well-being and like mental health and emotional well-being and so forth, if that is decreasing, that's not going to be sustainable. So something's going to have to give there. And better to be proactive about that than to wait for Saturn to have some structure of that coming apart. One thing that we also want to keep in mind here is that acute health considerations also show up in this house. And so you may burn yourself out such that you wind up getting sick. And so not only does the effort need to be sustainable, but your health also needs to be sustainable. Of course, doing that, especially with Neptune, will be in this house too. Taking excellent care of your immune system, like becoming an immune system expert, will serve you very well throughout the coming couple of years. Following those routines, making sure you're plugging any sort of nutritional gaps, that you're not your diet doesn't include a bunch of stuff that's going to throw you off too much, and that you try to be consistent with that. Not overly rigid, but consistent. Now, aside from that, you're also going to be refining the living heck out of your skills and your ability to get things done at a higher and higher quality through this time. So through putting one foot in front of the other day after day in a way that looks in the short term like there isn't a reward for it. But if you look at the time, the effort, the energy that you're putting in long term, you'll be able to see there is a huge difference between where you're starting at in 2026 with this and where you're ending up at in 2028 with this Saturn. Saturn, in my opinion, gives very long-lasting rewards, and it's in a place where you are able to build up routines that are going to serve you extremely well, for basically the rest of your life. Finally, also, I will say that Saturn in Aries is likely to have notions of independence become very important for a lot of people. And so that may be something that you are going after pretty strongly here, is wanting to have an independent work life, which may mean going out on your own and maybe establishing a business or something like that. If that's something that you are really wanting to do, this can help with that. And Jupiter also up in the 10th, when it moves in there this summer, that can also help with that quite a bit. But keep in mind that it's going to be a level of effort that you probably would not believe, when Saturn is involved and you're going independent, you're very much working with that Saturn, and it's probably going to feel like it's just constant and around the clock. It's also very likely to work out if you're putting that effort in. And even if you're not going off on your own, this can speak to stepping into positions of authority, being responsible for coworkers or subordinates. And if you are responsible for other people, one thing I would definitely preach with this is patience with the people that you're working with. But yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Scorpio. It's pretty straightforward. It might not be the most fun transit, but that's not really what Saturn's for. It is going to be very productive and highly constructive for you. So not too bad. So I hope that it does treat you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right. So for Sagittarius, we have Saturn in Aries transiting through your 5th house. And your 5th house has to do with a lot of very lovely things: pleasure, joy, play, childlikeness, excitement, personal spiritedness. So this is a major aspect of your inspiration and just what you love. But also your children and children in general tend to show up in this place. So if you do have children, this transit is definitely going to be impacting your relationship with them and them as well in a significant way. But overall, this is going to have you putting a lot more effort into all of these things and taking all of these things a lot more seriously. So taking play more seriously, which is to say really prioritizing that aspect of your life, understanding that, you know what, my life, it's here and I am here to experience life, to love life, to have wonderful experiences, to connect with the things that I love. And if you have been backburnering a lot of that, if you've been focusing a lot on maybe more practical, quote unquote, considerations and things like this, this is you really making the time for your joy and pleasure. You may even wind up underpinning a lot of that with spiritual reasoning for that. I tend to encourage that a lot. As a Sagittarius, I'm sure you very much agree that on a spiritual level, we are here to experience life and witness it and not just be working all the time. But also when it comes to your creativity, this is going to have you taking that quite seriously as well, which does have a bit of a different kind of a flavor to it. You may be thinking about monetizing a hobby or an interest of yours, or just doing it for money in some way or another, whether it be a craft that you do that you want to make and sell, or if this is a talent that you have that you are wanting to promote and to market. If this is something you're just really brilliant about because you love it and you're wanting to find some way to monetize that. This could also, though, be that you're really good. I hate to advocate betting at all, especially when Saturn and Neptune are in that house. But, maybe there's something that you really understand very well, and you're able to make money off of it in some way like that too. Games, basically, games that you're really good at. Now, there is always at least a yellow light when it comes to Saturn, so I want to reinforce that when it comes to any sort of gambling. But we don't always have to put money up in order to monetize playing either. This could be just like signing up for things where there are prizes. Now, specifically where it has to do with childhood, children, things along those lines, your inner child, also taking that very seriously. That if you feel any sort of way, if you feel any sort of inhibitions or blockages that this Saturn seems to be throwing into your course, in the coming couple of years, I would recommend first thing, hop straight into inner child kind of psychoanalysis of yourself. What is it that maybe you didn't receive that you would have loved to have received as a child? Is there a way that you are able to encourage that in order to build yourself up and basically reparent yourself? Are there any inhibitions that were encouraged by your parents that maybe you're able to take some responsibility for and gear that or guide that in a different way as well in order to free yourself up? This is about you now being the authority over your own joy and pleasure. So if that was shut down at all in your childhood, this is a wonderful transit to help to reframe all of that and fix that, basically, to correct it. Also, though, when it comes to your own children, this can go in a couple of different ways. So for one thing, they could be maturing. They could be becoming more responsible. This can show up as a kind of embodied transit, as like Saturn as your children. Your children may even be getting on your ass a bit at times in ways that might drive you a little bit crazy about, oh, you're supposed to be parenting or whatever. Why are you doing this thing that's very playful? You may need to have a bit of a conversation with them, about that you're also a human being, etc. All those things that come up at some point or another. This would be a period of time where I would expect for that to come through. But you could also have, I hate to say, some challenges in those connections, difficulty maybe seeing eye to eye or with timing or things like this. You may just feel like you're not getting it. And you may be young and totally open to, even younger kids and what the kids these days are doing and everything. But you might just continually feel like you're playing catch up when it comes to those things, especially during this transit. So I would just say, as long as Saturn's there, patience with yourself, with your children is going to be extraordinarily helpful in those connections. Encouraging that with your children, establishing boundaries in both directions, that being a two-way street. And finally, like if you, for any reason, are feeling the need to reparent yourself or whatnot, you're looking at any sort of challenges, this could also really point to you taking incredibly seriously the way that you did not like to be treated as a child and ensuring that you are not doing that with your own children. And that could be an interesting way, again, if you're dealing with inner child stuff, plus you're a parent, of wrapping those things together. And that can reinforce your own reparenting then as well. Now, aside from children, and this doesn't just have to do with your own children. If there are kids around, if you have nieces, nephews, if you're a teacher, if you are an influential figure on children at all, for one thing, the Neptune transit that I'm also going to be talking about quite shortly next week, in addition to this, so stay tuned for that as well. But also this Saturn is likely to have you having a greater influence over young people and them also taking you pretty seriously as well. So even if they're not your own kids, the impact that you have on children is important with this transit. Now, coming back to creativity and expression, this can also have you taking your self-expression very seriously. Again, on the, am I feeling inhibited? How do I get around that kind of aspect? Certainly, but also when it comes to what kind of an impact do I have on people when I am expressing myself, and really thinking that through and taking a lot of responsibility for that. And when it comes to taking your creativity more seriously and prioritizing that, especially if you are working on monetizing it, it may start to feel like work. That does really change the game. And then you wind up needing to kind of motivate yourself a bit differently when it comes to that. Now, that can be a wonderful lesson that Saturn is here to bring to you so that you're able to run with a hobby that you're wanting to monetize, to motivate yourself differently when it comes to that. But there is also a potential for blockage when we're dealing with Saturn. And usually what it's doing is throwing an obstacle up so that we can find a way around it. So when it comes to any sort of creative blockages or just not having as much fun, feeling like there's a bit of a wet blanket when it comes to things that you usually enjoy, it's not a stop sign. It's not saying give up on this. What it's saying is, for one thing, you can probably get some sense of satisfaction out of being really disciplined about your creative hobbies and interests and things like this. But also, how can you refine the process, especially, again, if this is writing or crafts or something like this, art? How can you refine your process such that when you do wind up a bit blocked, that there are certain structures you have in place to fall back on in order to feel less frustrated by those experiences? But yeah, I think that is really a lot of the themes that I wanted to touch on when it comes to this. Pay attention to inhibitions. If you find them arising, try to get to the root of them, because Saturn can go both ways on that. It's likely to have you feeling that way sometimes, but ultimately what it's trying to do is encourage you to be stronger in your self-expression. So yeah, other than that, I hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Capricorn, we have Saturn transiting through Aries is going to be in your fourth house. Your fourth house primarily has to do quite literally with your home and family. It can also have to do with your sense of your origin, so where you come from, and your deeply private life. So with Saturn moving through this area, there's likely to be a restructuring of sorts that is going to be quite literal in a lot of ways with regard to your home or your family. So you may be doing a lot of DIY stuff around your house, and possibly not just to decorate, although, as I'm going to talk about next week, Neptune's also going to be here in that fourth house as long as Saturn is there as well. And so that may be a factor of just, I want things to look differently, and so I'm going to put some effort into making that happen. But even like literally working on the structure of your home. So this could be an extension, or it could be reconstructive work within your home as well. Now that can also have to do with family. So there may be some roles shifting and changing. You may find that you have a lot of responsibility and obligations, and that you are wearing more hats, or like that there's more duties that you have to your family during this period of time. You may find, I hate to say, there may be weird experiences within your family, challenges, difficulties, obstacles that you're needing to surmount together, or that you're needing to surmount with regard to your connections with each other. And so it wouldn't be surprising if that winds up taking place, but when those shifts and changes do present themselves, if they seem to come out of nowhere or external to you, it is worth considering, is this putting me in a different role, a different position within my family, and what kind of extra responsibility is that going to entail? And perhaps is more being asked of me than is really fair, because Saturn is also going to deal with matters of boundaries. So you may need to establish some firmer boundaries, or make those boundaries more clear with your family as well. Also, when it comes to your emotional foundations, you may be getting clear about some things along those lines. You may be on maybe the plus side. I mean, this is all value judgment kind of stuff. Maybe you're looking back on your family and you're saying, hey, you know what? These things that I thought were unfair, maybe not so bad. Maybe I can look at those situations a little bit differently in a way that's more favorable to others. That would be lovely. More likely, it's going to be looking at some of the challenges, some of the inhibitions that you picked up on from family, some of the ways that maybe your sense of your role within your family has held you back broadly speaking, in your life in all sorts of different ways. Maybe there was a challenged relationship within your family, maybe even between your parents, and maybe that has you looking at your relationships in a specific way. But any sort of constrictions or challenges, conflicts, overly rigid structures, things like this that were a factor in your early childhood, those are likely to be very clear during this period of time, and you should be able to address those things now. Reparenting may be a major thing that's going on as well. I do have that for the fifth house transit, but that is also kind of the case for you as well, where you may find yourself reparenting yourself, especially with regard to any security needs that you feel like you had in your youth that maybe weren't taken seriously. You may be really trying to nurture yourself during this period of time around those things to build up that sense of internal security. That's something that you will be building through this time, is a sense of being able to deeply rely upon yourself and perhaps, hopefully, also your family, but definitely yourself. So building that really solid inner base for the sake of having a sense of a really strong foundation that you're building up from. And finally, there's a stop-go kind of a quality to Saturn in Aries. One thing that I think is important to think about with Saturn having been in Pisces for the past couple of years is it is an unusual kind of a Saturn. It's a lot more compassionate and sensitive and a bit more go with the flow. So we've been dealing with a pretty quirky Saturn. This is a Saturn that's also quirky, but in a very different way. The rules, the structures, the boundaries, all of that is coming back. So that's not really going to be too faltering, but the timing is weird with this Saturn. Aries is very instantaneous. It is very impatient. It's very action-oriented. And yet Saturn is all about building a long-term vision and like building a foundation that's going to last a long time. It rewards delayed gratification. And so that sense of timing within your family is likely to be a bit interesting and strange and off at times. You'll probably feel like you're just not on the same page, or that you're ready when someone else isn't, and vice versa, etc. Also delays in any sort of construction projects. Let me throw that out there too. If you are doing DIY stuff, expect for it to take a little bit longer than expected. But also, that can feel internally, because this is your private life, it's like your deep emotional core. You may feel a bit of that push and pull there as well, where you're trying to establish something really long lasting, but you're also feeling a sense of impatience with that. And all I can do when it comes to this Saturn, it's always going to be the best thing to be patient when you're dealing with Saturn. Trying to rush the timing rarely works out well. So we're going to have to heed the Saturn aspect of this much more so than the Aries aspect. But for you, the Aries aspect is what's in that fourth house. So it's a little bit more natural for you. So just, again, try to be deeply patient with yourself, with your family, with any sort of property considerations, things like this. And this should then go over a lot better with less of like needing to go back and fix things after the fact. But yeah, I think that's a lot of what I have for you, Capricorn. Like I said, next week, I'm going to be covering the Saturn-Neptune conjunction aspect of this transit that's going on. I recently discussed Neptune on its own so that we're able to tease all of these transits that you're going to be having in your fourth house apart, but then also look at them together as well. So if that's something that you're interested in, like I said, I recently did one on Neptune, about to do one on Neptune and Saturn together. So if that's of interest, definitely feel free to stick around for that. And other than all that, I hope that this transit treats you super well. And thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Aquarius, we have Saturn in Aries is going to be transiting through your third house. And this is the house of your connections to others, essentially. This is your community, your neighborhood, your city, the people, places, things around you, your communication style, your thought process. The mind also shows up here, especially the conscious mind. how you process information and then communicate it. Siblings and neighbors can also show up here. So we can see that you're putting a lot of effort into that and that you're taking that all very seriously. When it comes to your communication style, that's likely to be taking on, either intentionally or not, a more authoritative kind of a tone. So if that's something that you have been wanting to work on for some time, Saturn should be able to help you with that a lot, to express yourself with authority, maybe with a bit less hedging like I do all the time. The topic of conversation is also likely to be more serious for you. So what your mind is processing in terms of content and style, all of that is likely to be a bit more serious, maybe even a bit more weighty. So you'll be thinking quite a bit about your responsibilities. It's going to be taking up more cycles, what it is that you need to do, get done, the effort you're putting in, the sacrifices you're making, etc. Some of those responsibilities and obligations and things like this could definitely have to do with siblings or neighbors that you have around you, or even just the people that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. You may be putting yourself in a position of authority for those around you. So getting involved in community efforts or leading your community, or leading, like for instance, if you work in a specific field and you're getting involved in a group around that, leading that as well. Just stepping into more leadership and responsibility and authority positions with regard to the people, places, things around you in any communities that you belong to, even online. The third house can have to do with the online spaces. Also, when it comes to learning, so you may be structuring learning as well, and you may be trying to reinforce your knowledge or your experience that you're very comfortable with by putting more effort into learning. So certainly you could be taking some courses, things like this. And that would be pretty well advised, especially if you feel like you have the time to do that really correctly and put the effort into it that you would like to see. So for instance, if you already graduated, as I think most of us, who have gone through college can look back and be like, man, if I were to do that today, I'd probably do it a lot better. Yeah, I also have here like structured thinking replacing scattered ideas. So if you have felt like you've been a bit on your back foot, or you've been mostly responsive to situations, like you've been jumping from one thing to the next, like you haven't really landed on a solid plan for your near-term future or how to push things forward in the way that you're wanting to, this is also going to have you taking that quite seriously and structuring that day-to-day, like everyday life that you're wanting. You're able to plan that out long-term more and structure that almost organizationally. If you are a writer, this is going to be a bit of a double-edged sword, and you'll probably wind up developing some very helpful habits to help prevent writer's block. Sometimes there's going to be some learning lessons blocks that come up. That's one of the major things that Saturn deals in, is it will throw up an obstacle in order to teach you how to get around that obstacle if you're willing to put some effort into it. And so that is, again, it's a double-edged sword. There's major silver linings to that, because then you can develop some mechanisms and structures about how to work around a block when it comes up in a less serious way down the road. So just basically strengthening you when it comes to those things. But even with speaking, you may find yourself halting a bit. Saturn in Aries is also interesting in that it can be a bit of a stutter step thing. So stop, go, stop, go. You may find that your speaking style does that a bit more with Saturn here as well. And it may just be that you're checking, like double, triple checking your ideas a bit more before they come out of your mouth, which can, of course, inhibit your timing a bit. If that's something that you're not used to and you start to run into it, I personally am an INFJ, and we are notorious for this because we do our thinking externally, but we try to process our thoughts before they come out. So it's an uneven process, which is why I can sometimes be a bit halting in my speech. And if you want to look at ways around that, I'm sure there are some INFJ threads out there about how to get your thought process sorted out ahead of time so that maybe you're a bit less halting. That's, to be perfectly honest, part of the reason why I love having these notes that on these slides, it's not just for you guys, it's also for me to prompt me a bit and to help me out with my next idea so that I don't stop too long. But yeah, just like organizing your thoughts similar to this a bit more can be really, really helpful to that end. But yeah, I think that is pretty much a lot of what I have for you, Aquarius. It's not too bad, a placement, but that writer's block might be a real pain in the rear at times. So finding those solutions around that, don't look at it as just a stop sign. Look at it as an obstacle that you're supposed to find your way around, because that's usually what Saturn's going to wind up dealing in anyway. But yeah, I hope that this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. All right, so for Pisces, we have Saturn transiting through Aries, which is your second house, which has to do with your personal resources, your sense of safety, security, your livelihood, all things financial in this world, basically, but it also goes a bit beyond that in terms of your sense of feeling that you have enough or that you are enough. And so we can see that there's going to be a lot of effort that you'll find yourself putting into this area. This can be very deliberate, and I would certainly encourage that kind of thing, of taking quite seriously what your resources are, where you're wanting for them to be. This would be a good time to go a bit beyond the limits that you have placed upon yourself thus far. So trying to basically up the ante for yourself or increase what you're aiming for. And through effort during this period of time, you should see yourself accumulating a lot of very substantial rewards. This is the kind of transit where you may not notice that the numbers are going up, day to day, week to week, month to month. But if you were to look at quite literally your accounts now versus your accounts in a couple of years, if you are really trying to handle this area of your life, handle your resources super well, and the resources you're aiming at are monetary, you should see a pretty big jump over the course of that period of time. Now, of course, it does take effort. It does take looking at this from a very serious perspective, putting one foot in front of the other, not blowing through resources as well. So really delaying gratification when it comes to the utilization of your resources is going to serve you well during this period of time. But additionally, any sort of self-limiting beliefs about prosperity or about abundance or about what you bring to the table, the value of what you're providing, basically. Releasing any sort of scarcity mindsets along all of those lines is going to be really excellent. And again, especially any sort of impulsive spending too. That's one thing that Saturn is going to reward if you don't engage in that kind of thing too much during this period of time. Of course, taking care of your needs, and especially any sort of front-end investments that are going to save you money in the long run, like buying in bulk and things like this. Certainly that is not just blowing through money. That's not irresponsible. But I think just being very aware of your budget and where things are going is going to do a lot of good during this whole couple of years that you're going to have Saturn going through this house. And slow but steady is really the name of the game here. But beyond all of the budgeting, the discipline, the effort put in, the clarity of mind, the goal setting, the long-term vision when it comes to where you're wanting your resources to be at for you, this does go beyond just money and even notions of what you're bringing to the table for others, etc. But really, the effort itself that you put in is valuable and is something that you should take some pride in. What are all of the qualitative aspects of your skills, your talents, your personal aspects of self? So whatever it is that you're able to call your own, but that maybe isn't just the things that are around you, and maybe aren't just the things that you are able to maybe provide a company that makes their numbers go up or things like this, but the care, the consideration that you carry, the attitudes that you carry. There's so much about us that is really valuable that we tend to overlook. And if you feel like things are getting a bit dry in the coming couple of years, this is a pretty straightforward kind of a transit of, you know, one foot in front of the other, getting resources in order, etc. But if you're able to bring yourself back to, okay, but what are all of these other aspects of myself that I truly value? And what is it about life that I truly value? That, I think, is also going to help a lot with a sense of more holistic gratitude for what you genuinely have that can't be quantified. But yeah, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you, Pisces. Next week, we are going to discuss the fact that Saturn is going to be in this house with Neptune and give a bit more of a rounded view of not only what Saturn's going to be doing here, but what we're likely to see play out in this house in the coming couple of years. So definitely feel free to stick around for that if you are interested. Otherwise, I hope this transit treats you super well, and thank you so much for spending this time with me.